We've all heard of Atlantis. Many of us imagine the magical kingdom at the bottom of the ocean, inhabited by an advanced civilization. And why not? We can't be 100% certain of what lies beneath the waves. As of 2023, only a small portion of the ocean has been explored. Estimates suggest that around 5% of the ocean has been directly explored, and around 24.9% of the seafloor has been mapped with modern high-resolution technology, which means that the vast majority of the ocean remains a mystery, largely unexplored and uncharted. But while storytellers and Hollywood revel in the telling of this mystical city after it sank, today I hope to take you beyond the deep and discover the origins of this subterranean land. Where was it? Why did it sink? And who were the Atlanteans? Welcome to the mysteries of mythology, Atlantis. The myth of Atlantis begins with its first mention by the ancient Greek philosopher Plato in his dialogues Timaeus and Critias around 360 BC. These dialogues feature a character named Critias, who was Plato's uncle. In them, Critias recounts a story he claims to have heard from his great-grandfather Dropides, who in turn heard the story from the Athenian traveler Solon. It was Solon who visited Egypt around 580 BC and heard the story of Atlantis from an Egyptian priest. The priest claimed that the events of the story happened around 9,000 years prior, so around 9,500 BC. And here we run into our first problem. While academics agree that Solon did indeed visit Egypt, the story of the Athenian Greeks at war with the Atlanteans was not likely. That's because in 9580 BC, Athens didn't exist. Most academics agree that this period predates the development of agriculture and permanent settlements in the region. Plato's telling of the war between the ancient Greeks and the Atlanteans starts by describing a great war that happened between people living on opposite sides of the Pillars of Heracles, what we call the Strait of Gibraltar today. Plato then makes it clear that though Atlantis was not connected in any way to the Greeks, they've been given Greek names in his telling of the story for ease of understanding. The history of Atlantis begins with the earth being divided by the gods and building temples for their worship and sacrifices. Within Poseidon's domain was the island of Atlantis, an island greater in size than Libya or Anatolia, modern-day Turkey. On this island was a beautiful and fertile flat plain, and close to the plain, in the center of the island, was a small mountain. On this mountain lived the original inhabitants of the island, born from the earth, named Evenor, with his wife Leucippe and their daughter Cleito. Cleito was coming of age when her parents died. As she wandered the island alone, Poseidon noticed her and fell in love. If you've watched my Poseidon video, it wouldn't be a huge surprise if Cleito didn't feel the same way. To protect Cleito from outsiders, he created 2 rings of land around the original mountain and plain, with water in between. He also created a hot and cold spring in the center of the island and made sure that every type of food and animal the inhabitants could want was available. Cleito and Poseidon had 10 demigod sons, 5 sets of twins, and split Atlantis into 10 parts between them. He made the firstborn of the first twins king, giving him the rule of the largest and best part in the center of the island. The others were made princes, each ruling over large areas of the island and many inhabitants. The eldest twin and king of the island was named Atlas, and the ocean surrounding the island was named the Atlantic after him. The name itself, Atlantis, means the island of Atlas. There is some debate with the name of the island, with some saying that Atlantis means daughter of Atlas. This is because Atlantis is the feminine form of Atlas, but it was customary to name islands in the feminine form, but was not meant to mean the daughter of Atlas. With each generation following Atlas, the eldest son was chosen to rule the kingdom. The island enjoyed prosperity and peace, and the citizens were never hungry or afraid. Laws set down by Poseidon meant that no prince or king could take up arms against one another. At the center of the island was a column inscribed with the laws of the kingdom, and beside the laws, an oath that would curse anyone who wouldn't follow the laws. It's here that Plato describes Atlantis as having a rich supply of a valuable metal called orichalcum. There's no mention of it having any mystical properties, only that it was valuable, second only to gold. As time passed, the empire of Atlantis grew. The sons of Poseidon and their future families lived and ruled over various islands and controlled areas up to Egypt and what's now Italy, inside the Pillars of Heracles. Each generation built on the previous, adding the finest temples, walls, bridges, and canals. But with each age, while the island and the empire flourished, the divine blood began to dilute. The rulers were becoming more human. From the outside, Atlantis's future seemed bright, with even more prosperity expected. But from within, human vices such as greed and misuse of power began to grow. It was this greed that brought them to the gates of Athens, where a war began. Unfortunately, the end of Plato's second dialogue is missing. But in the first dialogue, there was a summary of what happened to Atlantis. It involves Zeus noticing the greed and corruption of the kings of Atlantis and calling a meeting with the other Olympian gods to discuss what to do about them. The climax of the story is that Poseidon strikes Atlantis with a giant earthquake, sinking the entire island in a single night. At the heart of Plato's narrative is a stark warning. Even the most prosperous societies can crumble if they succumb to greed, hubris, and the abandonment of justice. This cautionary message is contrasted against the backdrop of the Athenians, whom Plato idealizes as embodying a simpler, more virtuous way of life. Through the contrast between the doomed Atlantis and the idealized Athens, Plato invites his audience to consider that true greatness is found not in material wealth or military power, but in the commitment to justice and the cultivation of a harmonious community. But while some consider Atlantis a literal depiction of a historic city, Plato's fictional world-building prowess is nothing new. It's not the first time he's been the architect of fictional worlds, each serving as a stage for his philosophical explorations. In the Republic, Plato sketches the blueprint for an ideal city to discuss justice, governance, and individual roles within society. Similarly, the Laws presents a second-best city, diving into laws, order, and divine retribution. The story of Atlantis becomes even more fascinating because it may be based on real events. It could be referring to the volcanic eruption of Thera, a huge disaster that Plato and his contemporaries would have known about. The huge Minoan volcanic eruption devastated what is modern-day Santorini. Modern estimations guess that it could have been felt as far away as China, with some records talking about crop failures and an unusually cold July. Plato's use of real-life events makes the story of Atlantis feel more believable and helps to highlight the deeper philosophical ideas he's exploring by connecting them to actual history. Plato used Atlantis to show that being rich and powerful doesn't mean you're doing things right. To him, a great society was one that valued wisdom, justice, and working together for the common good. He thought that losing sight of these values, like Atlantis did, could lead to disaster. Let me start with an obvious but important point to consider. Plato was a philosopher, not a historian. Plato's story of Atlantis is intriguing, but filled with uncertainties and missing pieces that have left people guessing for years. One big issue is that there's no evidence outside of Plato's own stories to back up his claims, especially the ancient Egyptian records he says the story came from. Also, as discussed earlier, the timeline he suggests, with Athens and Atlantis battling it out 9,000 years before Solon visited Egypt, was the Stone Age, where the inhabitants didn't recognize the land as Greece, let alone there being the city of Athens. Plus, Plato talks about a barrier made of silt and mud, making it impossible to travel to the Atlantic Ocean after Atlantis sank. But there's no record of such a barrier. So it seems Plato was mixing fiction with deeper philosophical ideas, using the story more as a way to think about big questions than to give an accurate historical report. The story, though full of creativity and detail, seems to be less about recording true history and more about delving into philosophical discussions. The story of Atlantis, first told by Plato, has changed quite a bit in newer versions, with each change reflecting what people today are worried about or interested in. The first change is that originally Plato described Atlantis as a powerful nation that tried to take over the world but fell because of its greed and arrogance. But modern stories often skip this aggressive part, choosing instead just to focus on them becoming too decadent. The second most common change is that Atlantis wasn't sunk because of angering the gods, but that Atlantis destroyed itself by misusing its advanced technology. This fits in with current worries about how technology might cause our downfall. Also, the metal orichalcum, which Plato mentioned as a sign of Atlantis's riches, is now often seen in stories as having magical or super-advanced tech qualities. But orichalcum was simply a valuable metal worth more than silver and less than gold. The only time it was described as being used for building anything was to plate the inner wall of Atlantis because it was luxurious. The biggest change from the original, and the root of many films, books, and conspiracy theories, was that after the island sank, the residents survived. Not only did they survive, but they thrived, creating a world where the residents lived together with the creatures of the deep, keeping their advanced technology away from the hands of the rest of the human race. And with the way things are, I wouldn't blame them. These new takes on the Atlantis myth show how old stories get updated to reflect what each generation hopes for, fears, and values. They turn Atlantis from a warning about a doomed civilization into a symbol of mystery, the promise of technology, and even hope for a better way to live with our planet. People have been searching for Atlantis since Plato wrote about it. He wrote that Atlantis was beyond the Pillars of Hercules, known today as the Strait of Gibraltar, placing it somewhere in the Atlantic Ocean. Despite this, no one has found any solid proof of Atlantis, but it hasn't stopped people from trying. A popular idea is that Atlantis might be the Richat structure, also known as the Eye of the Sahara in Mauritania. This huge circular pattern in the desert, which can be seen from space, was once thought to be a crater but is actually the result of natural geological processes from about 100 million years ago. Its distinctive look has made some people wonder if it's the real Atlantis, especially because it looks very much like Plato's descriptions. But most academics don't believe this to be the case. Doggerland is another place that gets compared to Atlantis. It was a real land bridge connecting Britain to Europe that gradually submerged up to the Ice Age. Then, an underwater landslide triggered a catastrophic event, flooding the remaining Doggerland landmass. Unlike the speculative idea of the Sahara Eye being Atlantis, there's actual evidence that Doggerland was inhabited. Fishing boats in the region often pull up ancient tools from the Neolithic and Mesolithic eras from the bottom of the sea. In this area, archaeologists have discovered bones from Neanderthals and mammoths, and there are also well-preserved human footprints in a petrified forest that has recently become visible along the current coastline. Essentially, what we now call the UK was once just the tallest peaks of this ancient land, and the whole North Sea area was once a lush woodland haven dating back to the Mesolithic period. In short, while the Rishat structure, Doggerland, and theories like it are intriguing, they haven't proven Atlantis was real. So was Atlantis real? Are Atlanteans among us today? Or is it just a tale to teach us about the human condition and the dangers of hubris? Let me know what you think in the comments below. Learn more about the mysteries of mythology in the next videos.